Coming up on Colonial Crossfire, State of the Union economics, Cuba talks, and a new terror threat. Joining us on the left, Aaron Agnew. On the right, Gabriella Moringiello. And I'm your moderator, Kevin Fry. This is Colonial Crossfire. The State of the Union is strong, or so says President Obama. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire, I'm Kevin Fry. Earlier this week, Obama took to the podium in the House chamber for his annual address to Congress. For the first time in his presidency, the legislative branch is controlled entirely by the GOP. He spelled out new ideas, including free community college. He also took time to reinforce old ones, such as shutting down Guantanamo Bay. Here to analyze this speech is our student panel. On the left, Aaron Agnew, a sophomore from Windmore, Pennsylvania, majoring in international affairs as well as human services and social justice. She is currently a team leader with Jumpstart AmeriCorps. On the right, Gabriella Moringiello, a senior from San Francisco Bay Area in political science, majoring in political science and journalism. She is a reporter for campusreform.org. Thank you both so much for joining us. With low unemployment numbers and recent high stock market performance, Obama's address focused on the economic resurgence. His middle-class economic wish list included increased minimum wage, free community college, closed corporate tax loopholes, increased taxes for the wealthy, and tax credits for childcare. That's a mouthful. Here's what he had to say.
Middle-class economics works. Expanding opportunity works. And these policies will continue to work as long as politics don't get in the way.
So, Gabriella, will Republicans back the president on any of these ideas?
Well, I think that the one issue that Republicans and President Obama can come together on is corporate tax loopholes. I think that both parties agree that there needs to be significant tax reform because our tax system is beyond broken, and these corporations need to do a better job of contributing back into our economy. So I think that that is an issue where bipartisanship can come together and make that happen. But in order to do so, we need to start by lowering our business tax rate. Right now, it's at 39%, which is just unbelievable, and we need to start there, and I think that that's something that's going to be really difficult for Democrats especially to get behind.
A lot of what he talked about, though, was more the capital gains tax and these other taxes on the wealthier 1%, would you say?
Absolutely. He's talking to things that Republicans, I think, certainly can get behind. There should be business tax reform, but he was also speaking immensely to tax reform for startup businesses, so things that are going to revitalize the economy rather than restructure it. But the wonderful thing that he did was link a lot of very necessary tax reforms and kind of family planning, or not family planning, wow, Freudian slip there, but family expenditure reforms to tax structures, which gives something really institutional, lasting change and lasting power. So I think that as much as Democrats are going to be willing to work on corporate tax reform and work on fairly high-level issues, there's going to need to be compromise on the right side on getting things like childcare tax credits, getting things like community college funding.
And so it seems between the two of you, yes, tax reform might be in a point of agreement, but there are different means of going about that.
Definitely. I think that, again, going back to lowering our business tax rate, I think that's the most important issue. If you're familiar with the economist Art Laffer, you know that the Laffer curve has, painted this idea that when taxes reach a certain level, Americans react and their behavior becomes how to avoid paying those taxes. And so what we've seen with corporations is they're moving their operations overseas and they're contributing to economies elsewhere. And so we need to lower that tax rate in order to allow these corporations to repatriate their money in a way that, as long as they're investing in the U.S. economy and job creation. And I think that that's something that Democrats and Republicans should come together on.
And what's important, I think, to note is that you can also focus on job creation on a more local level. So you don't just have to talk about production and export. You can absolutely talk about things that are going to impact the Main Street sector, as people like to refer to it.
So areas of some agreement on all of this. Other issues that might perhaps see some disagreement. Wage reform rage increases. There has been debate over whether or not there should be an increase in the minimum wage. Of course, Obama did mention that he'd like to see that during his address on Tuesday. So where should the Republicans, can they agree on some of these things?
I think that increasing the minimum wage, or a federal policy that would increase the minimum wage, is a very divisive issue right now for Republicans. And that's because we've seen a lot of conflicting studies with regards to the results of increasing minimum wage. In California, we just had a study come out that said that, it reduced 6 million, or it eliminated 6 million jobs over the course of 10 years after they raised the minimum wage. But at the same time, you have states in the Midwest that suggest that raising the minimum wage has benefited their economy, and that by doing so, more often in the long term, you see better results. So it's difficult for Republicans to come together on that issue.
But then Republicans would need, so the argument seems to be that in the very, very long term, this would be something that is beneficial according to that result, if I'm interpreting it correctly. So why would they not want to embrace that?
If I could jump in, it certainly is beneficial. And when you look at jobs that are lost as a result of minimum wage increases, you have to bear in mind that some of what that means is that parents are no longer working 2-job households, and in some cases 4-job households. So you have people that are able to rely on a subsistence wage from one source of income, which is something that Republicans do reference time and again. The other thing is that you see wonderful decreased dependency on social programming. For DC, just as an example, our minimum wage is in the $8 range. If you index for housing, someone who is relying on food stamps for a primary source of food income and someone who is making basic healthcare expenditures, they should be getting a living wage of around $13.
And something that did strike me about this speech is Obama avoided words, not that Democrats would typically use this out of their own free will, but he avoided words like entitlement, like handout, and focused instead on people that are wage earners, that are workers. This was seemingly a different and very poignant way of embracing this issue, almost to the point where the Democrats are seemingly changing the conversation to embrace sort of Republican talking points.
Right, and I think this ties a lot into his repeated use of the term middle-class economics. It's something that he said 1,000 times over during his State of the Union on Tuesday. And the problem with that, though, is as brilliant as it was to release that term so that 2016 frontrunners can use it in the Democratic Party, at the same time, his policies, his middle-class economic policies, haven't been as brilliant. And Americans demonstrated they are desperate for policies that actually work and deliver when they elected a Republican Congress in November.
All right, final word on this.
I'd like to go ahead and say that his middle-class economic policies has actually been kind of lower echelon economic policies. He has not been able to get anything instituted that was as written or as intended. I think the biggest economic success as far as making sure that Americans get financial support when they need it was the Hope 6 program. That was a complete restructuring of public housing programs, and it really did change the face of American poverty and kind of pushed that up into a discussion that can happen surrounding middle-class economics.
All right, and so this is definitely going to be a discussion that we're going to see continuing, as you mentioned, into 2016, certainly kind of creating a platform for the next election, intentionally or not. We're going to turn to topic 2 now. Earlier this week, U.S. and Cuban officials began talks on how to normalize relations between the Cold War rivals, that being the U.S. and Cuba. Negotiations come 1 month after President Obama called for renewed diplomatic relations. In the State of the Union, Obama went a step further, asking Congress to lift the embargo on the island nation. Florida Senator Marco Rubio says he is skeptical of Obama's request.
And the problem is no one can cite for me, even to now, a single contemporary example of where a reluctant tyranny has turned into a democracy simply because you have more economic trade or more tourists visiting the island.
All right, so Aaron, listening to what Marco Rubio said, will the new U.S. relations help increase democracy on the island?
I don't know that they will, but I also am not positive that they should. I think with Cuba and with the potential of lifting the embargo, what we really have is a question of development, not necessarily governmental restructuring in Cuba. So it's an interesting case study in how trade can kind of help to support an economy, but there is so much infrastructure that's lacking in Cuba, and partially because it's been cut off from a lot of Western trade.
It is slightly a bit of a time warp if you look at some of these pictures of cars from the 60s and 50s. So one of the key arguments here that Obama is making is essentially that 50 years, nothing has changed. So why don't we try something different? Can the Republicans, you've seen Marco Rubio and others, can they latch onto that eventually?
Well, I don't think that this is going to produce any different results. Cuba has been trading for decades with European countries and with Canada, and the only thing that has done is line the pockets of the Castro regime. And why would President Obama or this administration or anybody who supports lifting the embargo and resetting our relationship with Cuba think that this is suddenly going to change because it's the U.S.? I think that it's just ridiculous to think that, suddenly the U.S. coming in there and lifting this lifting the trade embargo and allowing us to normalize our relationship with Cuba is going to have some monumental difference. It hasn't with Canada, it hasn't with European countries, and it's not going to happen.
And Senator Bob Menendez is criticizing the president because he's concerned one of the biggest issues is over human rights. That why are we negotiating with this country that simply is not treating its own population, its own citizens fairly? I mean, this is certainly something that needs to be considered, is it not?
Right, and the U.S. actually has a pretty sordid history and modern history with negotiating, working with directly funding nations that completely infringe human rights. One of the things that went missing completely in yesterday's speech was the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I don't know that that's something that people can particularly latch onto as a pushback against getting into Cuba. But I think a unique thing about American involvement in trade is that we like to have this history and this kind of idea of ourselves internationally as nation builders. We do try to institute democracy, and we do try to institute a strong civil society with countries that we trade in, which is something that the EU and Canada really don't care to try to do, especially when they're dealing just with trade, not with development.
I want to take a step back because part of this whole transition is more or less a generational change. Obama was only, 1 year old when the embargo was imposed. And so with that, it seems that the younger Cuban Americans, people that have been born here, are much more open to this transition, to lifting the embargo, to formalizing relations, whereas the older guard are less so. Is this a transition that we're going to see going forward?
Well, what the older guard realizes is that Cuba has a horrible track record as far as honoring their financial obligations. They have, allowed Russia and Mexico to write off their debt. They defaulted on $30 billion in debt to European creditors. So, why would the U.S., and specifically the older generation that has seen this happen time and time again, why would they be eager to embrace a country that hasn't demonstrated any reason for the U.S. to be trusting them?
So it seems more of an experience argument, seeing what the results are. Absolutely. We're going to have to end it there just because of time, but after this break, new investments in space and Glozell interviews the president, whatever that is. It's Rapid Fire. Stay with us.
The George Washington University, at the intersection of policy, practice, and research, connecting all that Washington has to offer with an intellectual environment that drives progress, transforming vision into action, offering learning experiences that are rigorous, real-time, and real-world. In a city shaping the future, George Washington is a place where faculty and students don't just study the world, they work to change it.
It's on us
to stand up to those who tell us it's not our business.
to tell our friends if what they're doing is wrong.
It's on us
to do something, anything, to keep an assault from happening.
to be more than a bystander.
To create an environment where women feel and are safe.
It's on us
to change the way we talk about women.
To be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
It's on us.
To say something when our friends are being stupid.
To hold our friends accountable for their actions.
It's on us.
To look out for someone who's had too much to drink.
To step in if a friend is doing something that could lead to sexual assault.
It's on us.
To not give our friends a pass.
To never blame the victim.
To stop a sexual assault any way we can.
I am a member of the George Washington University community, and it's on us to end sexual violence.
Welcome back. Our panel joins us once again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. We start with a little stargazing. Google and Fidelity just invested $1 billion into SpaceX, a company that aims to one day build a settlement on Mars. The deal would give Google the opportunity to use satellite technology to expand the internet service to underserved regions across the globe. So Aaron, these are two private companies shooting for the stars. Is NASA even still relevant?
NASA certainly is still relevant. A lot of the funding that goes to NASA currently, especially coming out of the economic crisis we've been in, is for research that happens right here on Earth. The president very pointedly referenced a lot of that research and programming in his speech yesterday. He was actually very careful to tie prosthetic research and space research to things that are going to help sustain kind of agricultural progress on Earth, as well as quality of life increases.
If I remember correctly, it was also during that section that he told one of the Kelly twins to take Instagram photos up in space when he's on the International Space Station. What's your thought on this?
Well, I've heard that SpaceX, one of their primary goals is to expand internet access to remote areas across the globe.
This is more Google's investment in it, but yes.
Right. Well, I applaud Google for making an investment with a company that has a noble goal like that. And I think that obviously NASA is still relevant because NASA is the brains. NASA does the research as far as space technology goes, looking at new developments in space, looking at planets, everything that Google can't really do. Yes, they may have, be the financial backer, but that's not something that Google is proficient in.
They're gifted with innovation, though, and that's another thing that was referenced, which I think is going to be great. And it's proof positive. If we can get Wi-Fi access on Mars, we should also be able to get it in Detroit and 1.7 in DC.
Well, I don't know about Wi-Fi on Mars yet. Those Martians, I think, are self-sufficient on their own. President Obama, moving on to a different topic, President Obama gave 3 interviews in the days after the State of the Union, but it wasn't to Scott Pelley or Brian Williams. It was instead to people like Glozell Green, Bethany Moda, Hank Green. I've honestly heard of none of these people, but they're all 3 YouTube stars. They all sat down with the president. So, Gabriella, is Obama pandering to millennials, or do these interviews have some value?
No, they have no value whatsoever. That being said, I'm a huge fan of Glozell, but at the same time, President Obama needs to be focusing on further improving our economy and our national security, not entertaining, YouTube sensations. I just think that it's ridiculous and it's a waste of time, frankly.
But it's certainly a way to reach the younger generation, assumedly.
Yes, but I think some numbers show that Obama doesn't really have a problem reaching the younger generation. I think there is substance behind these interviews. They're questions that are pertinent. They're coming from, the most popular source we have, the internet and the blogiverse and the tweetosphere and all of those good things. So it's genuine outreach and it's a genuine discussion. So regardless of where these people found fame, I think it's genuinely devaluing to the American population on the whole to call them useless.
And finally, the New England Patriots. We're going to move to sports, another topic I know nothing about. Patriots will face off against the Seahawks in the Super Bowl. Aaron, which team is going to win?
I don't really sports either, so I'm going to say the Patriots because that's a great name.
Yes.
Yep.
I think it's dependent on who's providing the football.
Okay, and there we have it. On that, yes. All right, we're going to end our debate on that with that on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you to both Gabby and Aaron. We will take a break right now. When we come back, terror in Europe and Africa, plots on the U.S. Capitol. Is the terror threat evolving? We ask the former ambassador at large for counterterrorism next.
The buzz started for me out on the line outside of the Barclays Center. A lot of GW alumni filtering in.
I'm just so proud to be an alumni and be a part of this movement.
There hasn't been a team like this in 7, 8, 9 years.
I'd say we probably have over 1,000 people here, and you can feel the energy.
I graduated in 1991.
I graduated in 2009.
I graduated in 2005 from Elliott School.
The School of Medicine and Health Sciences.
From the Columbian College.
If you want a place to be in the world tonight, it's right here with all of our alumni, students, parents, friends of the George Washington University.
It's just important to have a community that supports our student athletes.
I love this team and I'm proud to support it.
Everyone that's participated and made this happen knows it didn't happen overnight.
What we're trying to do is develop students and student athletes to really impact the world.
This is an even better turnout than last year.
The first thing it can really do for us is get our name out there.
Applications the next year go through the roof.
Tonight you are the George Washington University.
It raises the school spirit and makes us all proud to be Colonials.
And you have really galvanized our whole university community.
You're building a spirit and you're building a family within the university stronger than we've ever had before.
Gentlemen, go out there and raise high.
Crank it up.
Raise high!
Raise high!
Win, baby.
Crank it up.
Raise high, the buff and blue.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here now to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Thanks, Kevin. First, to our conservative debater, Gabby, who said the corporate tax rate is 39%. Federal tax rates on corporations range from 15 to 35%, so 39 is a bit out of that range. While the exact rate can vary by state, the issue at hand for the president and Congress is federal corporate tax rates. And on to our liberal debater, Erin. She said the minimum wage in D.C. is in the $8 range. However, the current minimum wage in the district is $9.50 and will increase to $11.50 by 2016. That's it from the Fact Check Desk. Kevin, back to you.
All right, thanks, Casey. Turning overseas now, earlier this year, two brothers raided a satirical newspaper office in Paris, France, killing 12. One of the suspects, Sharif Kouachi, allegedly studied in Yemen and met with Anwar al-Awlaki, the leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The attack highlights new concerns about the evolving nature of terror. In recent years, thousands of Western citizens have traveled to Iraq, Syria, and Yemen to fight alongside extremists. The fear is that if they return home, they could unleash new attacks like those in Paris. Earlier, I sat down with former Ambassador Thomas McNamara to discuss the evolving terror threat. McNamara served as ambassador to Colombia in the 1980s. After 9/11, he returned to government, serving as a senior advisor for counterterrorism and homeland security at the State Department. He is currently an adjunct professor in the Elliott School. So, you worked in the Bush administration directly after 9/11. In light of what's happened in Paris at Charlie Hebdo, how has the terror threat evolved over the past decade and a half?
Well, I would say that the main threat that occurred in the period before 9/11 was of Muslim terrorism in specific came out of the Muslim countries into the non-Muslim world. That has continued to a much more limited extent because of the measures taken after 9/11, not only in the U.S., but in Europe and elsewhere. What's increased in numbers, however, is the dissatisfaction and disaffection of the Muslims who have participated in the dispersion of the Muslim world, basically second-generation Muslims in non-Muslim societies.
So these individuals such as the Kouachi brothers in France.
Such as the Kouachi brothers.
And so that's one of the new concerns, it seems, is that these individuals that are born in Western nations, we'll say, travel to Iraq, Syria, etc., are trained and then come back. That's something that's new.
That's something that's not totally new, but it has become a major theme or a major strain in the terrorism that we're experiencing, and therefore requires a lot more attention. It's worse in Europe than it is here in the United States, although it's not completely absent, and it reflects indeed a phenomenon in Europe of relatively closed societies where the non-native, and this would be the parents of some of these native Muslims in Europe, who don't integrate in part because the society doesn't accept integration of the non-French, German, Norwegian, whatever the country is, with quite the same alacrity that happens here in the Western Hemisphere, in the United States, Canada, and Latin America. We're used to bringing in
the melting pot.
The melting pots, exactly. And in Europe, you're French if your great-great-grandparents were French, in effect, and therefore the assimilation, particularly when there has been such an exodus from Muslim societies into Europe, is much slower and therefore much more frustrating, and leads particularly to that second generation. The first generation is much better off. If they weren't, they would not have left where they came from.
But that second generation.
But the second generation expects to be dealt with in the same way that everyone else in the society is dealt with. And when they see discrimination, when they see an inability for them to plan a future which would be useful and rewarding for them.
So how can organizations like Europol, like these state organizations, how can they prevent these individuals who feel left out, who don't feel that they've become assimilated? How can they prevent them from acting out?
Well, Europol is not going to be able to do it. Local police may be able to do it by becoming, and we have this problem, by the way. Blacks in our society are not treated the same way by American police forces. So by treating them the same way, that is the beginning of it. But in the case of Europe, and in the case of the United States, particularly post 9/11, we have not been as open and as capable of the absorption of these people, and most of them, the vast majority of them, wish actually to be absorbed in the new society. They're not looking about going home. They're not jihadists in waiting, so to speak.
Looking at this issue now, that there are these splinter groups, these cell groups that are forming essentially in Europe, that we've seen many raids in the past couple of weeks to take these down. Is it still an effective strategy by the U.S. and by other governments to have these very focused raids and drone attacks on al-Qaeda leaders in Afghanistan, in Yemen? Are those still effective ways to prevent terrorism?
Oh yeah, quite effective. In fact, the reason why the current, if you will, wave has occurred with homegrown or domestic terrorists is because of the weakness that has happened in these organizations internationally.
But they're still certainly inspired in some way or another by these, so even if they were killed, they're still going to have ripple effects.
That's right, but the organizations themselves are weaker. The ideology hasn't been weakened by the attacks, but the organizations have. And you have to remember, for terrorism to be successful and to be useful, it has to have the ideology behind it and the organization to make the ideology, in effect, useful in the social realm.
One final thing, and this is sort of in light of about a year of concerns about the NSA, is wiretapping and listening in on phone calls, is that perhaps one of the only effective means of keeping track on these cells?
No, not at all. It is an effective means, but it is part of a panoply of efforts that are going on simultaneously. You can't, there's no silver bullet, and that includes tapping into communication networks, etc.
Is it worth the cost of civil liberties?
Well, that's a question the American public and the European public is debating right now. I think if you've noticed that as a result of these recent attacks, Germany, France, and Britain are beginning to come closer to the United States view with respect to increasing the level of such intercepts that they've been engaged in them. They haven't been engaged in them to the extent that the U.S. has, but then they didn't suffer the shock of 9/11. And I think that we need ourselves to come back to some balance, just as we need to rebalance our attitudes with respect to the assimilation of Muslims in American society, which has deteriorated since 9/11. It was much better before 9/11. So also we've got to rebalance rebalance the situation between civil liberties and protection of the population. And there's always a tension there, and we'll never absolutely come to a conclusion, yes, we've got it right. Something else will happen in some other arena at some other time in the future, and we'll have to rebalance again.
So it's a debate that will continue to go on into the future.
It's an endless debate.
All right, so thank you so very much, former Ambassador McNamara. After this break, Spilled Milk, our wrap-up of late-night comedy. Please do stay with us.
I believe. I believe that. I believe that we.
I believe that we will win.
Nearly 16 million people visit Washington, D.C. every year. Some come to witness, some to be heard. We come to make an impact, to learn from leaders, and to lead others. To create and create change. We are the George Washington University. We come to make history.
Welcome back, and now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy. Take a look.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long, a symbol of the dawn.
A new report that says that by 2016, the world's wealthiest 1% will control more wealth than the other 99% of us combined. Just to put that in simpler terms, one rich kid gets half the swimming pool to himself. 99 kids have to share the other half. We should definitely pee in it, right? I mean...
Mitt Romney is reportedly considering running for president in 2016. In a related story, Charlie Brown is planning on finally kicking that football.
Biden said this morning that he thinks he can do a good job as president. He thinks he can do a good job as president. And if that doesn't work out, he would like to be an astronaut or a fireman.
I was never embarrassed because the school bus would be filled with rows and rows of young Iowans with bread bags slipped over their feet.
Is that you, Siri?
Well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Kevin Fry. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you next time.